Alright, so the next thing on the agenda is putting the passenger side axle back in. So I'm going to clean the end of it, get all that stuff off there so I don't introduce any dirt into the transmission, and then we'll get everything bolted back down. Alright, it took a little bit of wiggling and the axle shaft's back in. The 3 bolts that hold the center carrier are in and torqued down to 40 foot-pounds. Sway bar and link, lower tie rod, and lower control arm and tie rod are all done. Now all I have to do is put the speed sensor back in, and then I will start assembling the brakes. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do here real quick before I start reassembling the brakes is I'm going to hit all this rust with the wire wheel and just try to clean it up just a little bit. Alright, I've been on it for a few seconds. There's one I haven't done and there's one I have, so you can see the difference. These are clean. I'm still working on this one, but you can definitely see where the rust is. And the other thing we're doing is cleaning this inside edge just to get all of this rust off. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is put the brake rotors back on. You know, even doing your best, you're probably still going to touch the surface. Your hands get dirty, so always clean them with some brake clean. That way you don't contaminate your pads. So that's what I'm going to do next. Actually, I'm going to go in here and just clean this little bit of rust up with the thing, and then I will go ahead and clean up the rotor and put it back on. Alright, this is how much oil and grease I was able to wipe off with just a little bit of brake clean. So yeah, they're not as clean as you think they are. Alright, so rotor's back on, screws are back in. The nut is not on, it's just tightened up. This needs to be torqued to 200 foot-pounds. Once I have the brake assembly reassembled, I will have to torque that, but right now, since it's in the air, it's kind of hard because there's no way to stop that from rotating. So that will be the last thing I do, but I will put all the brake assembly back together, do the other side, and then we'll torque both sides down. Alright, I'm going to hit the brake caliper bracket with some brake clean, because as you can see, this side is dead. This one not so much, so we're going to go ahead and clean this up just a little bit, so try to keep some of the dirt out of there for a while. Okay, so caliper bracket back on and torqued down, caliper back on and torqued down. I did wipe the pads down with some brake clean before I remounted them, just in case somehow they got some grease on the surface. So that's all back together. Again, this nut is still not tight. I will get to that in a second, but I need to do the same thing on the driver's side. That way I can lock up the transmission, and so I can torque that down. So just like the passenger side, we're going to hit the surface here with the wire wheel and get that cleaned up. Then we're going to put the rotor back on. Okay, and just like that, rotor's back on, screws are in. Whether or not you use them, that's your preference. I like to put them back. Still not torqued, need to do that. Caliper bracket is torqued and on, calipers torqued and on. So next thing we're going to do is I'm going to get rid of these bungee cords. So I need to go ahead and torque these down. I'm going to put the lugs on here and see about getting my pry bar in here so I can hold this assembly while I torque that down. Alright, so in order to tighten these down, what I have found that works fairly well is I go ahead and put the lug nuts back on. This way I can't damage them. I put my long pry bar there and wedge it against the ground, and then as I apply pressure, I can torque that without having to worry about anything. So get out your trusty torque wrench, 200 pounds. If you don't have one that goes to 200 pounds, max out whatever you have. As long as it's on there, you shouldn't have too much of a problem, but yeah. And then once you torque that down, you're going to smash this nut back into that groove. That way it can't back off. Okay, and just like that, the nut is torqued. The other side is torqued. Now I just need to dimple that in. So I need to find a hammer and a small punch. And it might be a little hard to tell, but that's all I did. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is crack open all the bleeders one at a time. And I'm going to drain all of the remaining brake fluid that's in the system. I'm going to replace the entire brake fluid because that's also part of the clutch. I want to get all that fluid out because I still have to do the clutch pedal master piece that goes in there. So I'm going to go ahead and start draining that, and then I'm going to go inside the car and disconnect the clutch pedal from the slave, and then disconnect it up here at the brake master itself. Okay, so I cracked open the bleeder. I have a hose hooked up here, and it's just going to drain into that pan. So that'll be what I do, and then I'm going to go up on top and start disassembling that last bit of the clutch piece. Okay, and so what I'm doing right now is I'm purging the system of all the old fluid. So I have my power brake bleeder here. I have put the cap on the master cylinder. There's no fluid in the tank. I'm just trying to clear out all the old fluid so I can put in fresh. So that bleeder is open down on the driver's side. I put pressure in here. There's about, looks like it's dropped down to about 3 pounds or so. I had initially pumped it up to 5, and it's slowly going down. And if I go down in the bottom, I don't know if you can see way down there, but there's fluid coming out that hose, and that's what we want. So the next thing I'm going to do is get a pair of needle nose so I can pull this clamp off, because at its angle I cannot get a good enough squeeze on it. And then back in here, it may be hard to see, but there's this little metal guy down here, and just like the top of the line right here, it just has one of these pins. You pull that off and you turn the whole unit, I believe, if I remember, trying to remember what the diagram showed, I believe it's counterclockwise just a little bit, and then it disconnects from the firewall and you can pull it out. So I have to disconnect the clutch pedal from that unit, and then those are the two things I need to do, and I can put the new part in. Just a quick important little side note. This plastic tube only goes about 1 inch here, but be careful not to break that, or you're going to have to replace your whole brake master. This one came off fairly easy. Okay, so here's our new one that we're going to be replacing, that one over there. So this is the part I still have to disconnect from the inside of the car, but you can see how this piece has little cuts in it, so you need to turn it towards the driver's side. So it's going to be in the car like this, and you're going to turn it towards the driver's side, and then it will slide out. So I need to disconnect that. Probably not going to get a good video of it because there's not a whole lot of room. I'm a big person, and unless I take the seats out and do a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah. Okay, let's see if you can see the clutch pedal here. Right here, where my finger's pointing, is the clip we need to pop off. If one thing, these little cars are easy to work on. A clip or a pinch cable. So far, very few tools to do most of this work. Alright, so I'm going to get up there with both my hands because it's hard to do with the camera in the way, but I'm going to pull that clip, disconnect the thing from the car, and get it out of there. And just like that, there's the pin. You just have to turn it a little to get that little hook side off, and you just pull straight out. The other thing that's right there is this plastic washer, and I don't know if you can see, but it's now not there. Okay? Now to take the rest of the unit out from the other side. Alright, it might be hard to see. Let's see if I can get it from here. Alright, So where the little clip is, I just used the tip of the screwdriver and it popped right out. Then the little black piece needs to slide out of there, but I couldn't get it to slide, so I had to use the tip of the screwdriver just to give it a wiggle, and it came right out. So there shouldn't be too much force behind that. It's almost out. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this hose, but I'm going to get a couple, oops, and that was what I was afraid of. So I'm going to get some paper towels real quick because I do have a leak and it's dripping brake fluid. Okay, so we got our two pieces out, and there's a very important thing that you must pay attention to. The new piece comes out more or less kind of straight-ish, but if you look, the old piece has this 90 degree that we're going to have to transfer to the new part. So everything else is the same, we just need to get this 90 degree elbow off and onto this thing. So let me knock that out real quick and then I can start putting it back together. Like I said, you just twist it a little bit, you'll hear it pop, and then it's free. Perfect. Alright, something else to be aware of, that little 90, or whatever you want to call it, 45, 90, only goes in one way. So it has to seat flush all the way against the housing, but if you look right here where this white paint is, see that is a notch, and that fits in the metal thing. So that has to be in the right location or you will never get that back in. Okay, so it's back in, and it takes a little bit of fiddling, and the front edge of that actually has like a groove so you can grab onto it. So I use these angled needle nose pliers and was able just to grab the end of it and just twist it just a little bit, and it locked it in place. I couldn't do it by hand, and I really did not want to be twisting on that upper tube because I was afraid it was going to snap. So it's a little fiddly to get back in. Alright, so next we're going to reconnect the metal line, and then we'll connect the rubber one back to the master. Okay, and make sure you seat that all the way in so that that clip locks into place. So the black plastic should be flush with the metal. There should be no gap. Alright, so the next part is we're going to go back under the dash and reconnect the clutch pedal. Okay, so the clip is back in, the clamp is back on, hose is done, and the pedal is reconnected. Now the pedal was a little fiddly. I ended up having to put a little white silicone on the inside of the plastic piece for the clutch so that it slid back over the clutch pedal a little easier because it was kind of tight. And now that's all back together. It's all clipped back in, washers back in, and that little keeper's back in. So the next thing I'm going to do is jack up the back of the car, pull the wheels off, and completely finish bleeding the brake system. Then I will go ahead and start bleeding the brakes. That way I can get that done, but when I jack up the car it will be level and I can fill the transmission at the same time. So I can get a couple of things done, make sure everything's working. So that'll be the next step. So the next step will be breaking the rear lugs, jacking it up, pulling the tires. Alright, so car is completely in the air, all four tires are off, sitting on jack stands, the jack's just sort of hanging out right there. I'm going to bleed the other three corners and then we'll start refilling the system. Alright, brake fluid is in the container, we have pressurized the tank, now we're going to go to the farthest wheel and bleed the brakes. Nice thing about this system, it's pretty much one person job. All you got to do is pressurize the tank, go to the bleeder, and bleed until there's no air bubbles. I always catch the fluid in something, so it's not all over the ground. Alright. Okay, so I've cycled through the brakes bleeding process twice now. I'm on the last one here. I'm just going to double check it, make sure we don't have any residual air bubbles, and then I'm going to bleed the clutch. I'm going to read up real quick and see if there's any special procedures. I don't think there is because there's only one bleed valve, so we'll see. Alright, I don't know if you can tell, but there is no bubbles. If you listen closely, You can hear that it's dripping into the container at a nice even flow. So, yep, we have the system bled. And go ahead and tighten that down. And then we're going to move on to the clutch. Okay, so brakes are bled, clutch is bled, feels like I have pedal. Alright, so ECU is bolted in, clip is back on, 3 bolts back onto the ECU things there. I do need to plug this back into this ground, but I'll do that once I connect the battery. So we're going to put the battery in, I'm going to put the intake in. I'm not going to put the air box in case I have a leak. I want to be able to check. But we're going to get ready to start it. Alright, battery's in, connected. It is not tied down because if I have to take it back out, there's no reason to do that yet. But we're going to try for a start and see how the brakes feel and see how the transmission feels. Alright, car started up. Everything sounds fine. Clutch seems to be working. It went into gear, no problem. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead, and since I have the car level on jack stands front and rear, I'm going to go ahead and fill the transmission. And then I'm going to go ahead and put it on the ground. Figure I might as well do this while I can still reach everything. Alright. Alright, so I'm filling the transmission. There's my Royal Purple. I am going with 7590. This is the book called for 7585, so but I'm going to go with the Royal Purple. I've got my hose going down there. I got it plugged into the thing, and I'm just letting this drain. What I did is poked a little hole in the top here so this thing will just gravity feed in. The hose is a piece of surgical hosing that I had left over from when we had some procedures done. So, but the hose works really well for this. So, while this is doing that, I'm going to go ahead and put the wheels back on the car, so when this is done, I can just set it on the ground.